Let me know when
Hey,
you're
we're
ready.
good. We're live.
Hello. Okay, wonderful. That's great. Okay, so um, for the people who are joining in right now, we are muted except for Eric and Marty and myself. I'm sure that many of you did read the bio that I posted about Marty, okay, and who he
What's in my
is.
bio? That's top secret stuff. Cat's out of the bag now. Thanks.
Sorry, man. You know, what can I tell you?
That's right.
Marty and I actually met. This is fascinating. Many of you know that Binny's World of Whiskeys is now held in a gigantic cavernous space. Huge. It used to be held, Binny's World of Whiskeys used to be held, and Jane Canarak will remember this, Eric Schneiman will remember this, others will remember, that it used to be held in the basement of the Binny's Catacombs in Lakeview. Okay?
Ivanhoe, the old Ivanhoe.
Exactly. And this was about 12, probably about 18 years ago that I met Marty, back when he was the Diageo rep with the classic malts. And he was wearing, you were one of the few people that were wearing a kilt, by the way. Okay.
Trying to, felt it was only natural. An Irish boy from the southwest side of Chicago wearing a Scottish kilt. I thought it just
might as
made
well.
sense.
So the other thing I'd like to say about Marty that's interesting is that he's extremely helpful. Last fall, when my daughter was in Israel already, and my wife was going to the UK for 10 days, I contacted Marty when I heard about this program in Chicago, a whiskey tasting called Whiskey Live. And I asked Marty if he knew who runs Whiskey Live, and of course he knew. And he gave me the email of the person in the UK. And next thing you know, I was staffing Whiskey Live. And so, Marty, again, thank you very much for that. It was wonderful. It was great. And what I'd like to know now, Marty, first thing is, what are you drinking tonight and why?
Well, I am drinking a little something of my own. Hello.
Oh.
Other people do some blending too. This is, if you go to a website called, and some of you might have already seen it, whiskeyblender.com.
Okay.
It was started up by Andy Davidson. He is the son of Ray Davidson, who created the Glencairn glass. And he went off and started his own little projects. And one of them is Whiskey Blender. And so you can go online and blend your own whiskey by taste profile. So if you want it so smoky, so briny, if you want it the caramel to be a little more prominent, a little more floral, you get all the different levels and you make it to your own adjustment. Then you can name it. You can come up with a name. I put something in Gaelic that I totally forgot what it means. I should look it up. And then you put your name on it, personalize it, and the date that you blended it. And it comes in a Glencairn decanter.
Oh, very nice. Very nice.
Nice thick cork all the way from Portugal. Very nice. Nothing but the best.
Beautiful.
But anyways, I've started drinking this in the last couple of weeks. I cracked it open and I'm going to continue. I don't want to open up too many bottles of whiskey.
I understand. So I'm drinking Redbreast 12. Okay.
Beautiful whiskey.
And you like the glass I'm drinking it in, I presume?
Very nice.
Okay.
Is anyone out there not drinking with a Glencairn glass?
All right. So
I will come after you.
I know you will. So let's talk about this for a second.
Yes, sir.
In my left hand, where I'm drinking my whiskey, my 12 roses, my Redbreast, or my 12-year-old Redbreast, I have a Glencairn glass.
Yeah.
Now here I have a different kind of glass, which I understand is called a Highland Park glass, correct?
It is, if it's not from us, and it doesn't look like it quite is. Yeah.
So this one is from this is from Whiskey Jubilee.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, and Whiskey Jubilee, yeah. So Josh had a deal with, I think, Libby. It's a Libby Glass Company, and so that's a creation of Libby.
Okay.
They're less expensive, and it's basically just plain glass, where all of our glassware is either leaded or non-leaded crystal.
Okay, can you talk to us though about the shape? Because you have this unique shape, you have the foot at the bottom a little bit, and why you like this glass and why it's good for tasting.
Well, the whole idea behind the Glencairn glass is that it was initially Ray Davidson, who had been making whiskey decanters for the Scotch whiskey industry for about almost 15, 18 years at this point. Noticed that there was no whiskey glass. I don't know how many of you folks were drinking whiskeys back in the 90s. I was a bartender at the time, and that's what everyone
This is
drank
what
out of.
we were drinking out of this, right?
Well, what's that called? If it's not called a balloon glass, it's called
You got me.
Brandy snufter.
Is
a
that a
brandy
snifter?
snifter. Brandy
A snifter,
snifter.
Brandy
yeah.
snifter.
So what are you supposed to be drinking out of it?
Well,
Blended.
not this.
Well, and that's just it. So the son, Paul, did it. Ray thought, he came up with the idea, came up with the initial design, and then he thought, people aren't going to go for this. It's a little late in the game to come up with a glass just for whiskey. But actually, it was a perfect timing because people were, because whiskey was on the rise. It was returning. It was the rising from the ashes. Prior to 1990, you really didn't. You had a few scotches out there, single malt scotches making the name. Blended scotches had hit kind of a dead end. A lot of bourbon. Whiskey had been surpassed by vodka as early as 1975 as the drink of choice in the U.S.
Okay.
So it was dead. And when I was bartending in the 90s, the big drink wasn't Manhattans or old fashions. It was vodka martinis, straight
Really?
up. Oh my God. They didn't even want vermouth in it. I thought, you're kidding me? That's the one thing that might give it flavor. And they want it shaken, not stirred, shaken real hard so there'd be that little field of ice on top. Anyways, Paul Davidson comes to work one day. He looks at this glass sitting up on the shelf, says, "Dad, what's this?" He said, Dad tells him, "Yeah, I thought we'd make a whiskey glass." He likes that idea. He says, "Let's run with it." And so they felt they needed to fine tune it, and they needed to get some expert opinions. So what they did, they recruited 5 different master blenders and distillers in Scotland. 2 of which are still in the business that you might still run into is Richard Patterson with the Dalmore and Dave Stewart with Balvenie. They're the ones who said, okay, the bulb down here needs to be a little wider. You want to collect the aromas. Then you want to channel it, but you want, unlike a rocks glass or many other glasses, you want it to be funneled up. But if you notice, even with a brandy glass, a brandy snifter, the opening there is, I'm pointing at your glass on the screen. It's this way, it's channeling it straight up to your nose.
Right.
Now, the beauty of this glass is that, and I've heard some people say, there's this one guy who owns another whiskey glass who came up with this bogus story or theory that the reason so many men drink whiskey is that it's because of the Glencairn glass. The Glencairn glass scared away women because it drove too much aroma, and the women have a better sense of smell. I go, well, that's freaking asinine. That's, what are you coming up with? That? Oh, it's too much aroma. Oh my God, my head. Oh, it's all too much at once. So the whole idea with the nose and glass, like the Glencairn, is that if you were to nose your whiskey, you give it a swirl, just kind of release a little bit of the aroma, let it start rising up. Nose the glass from the bottom up slowly. And you'll notice that the bigger, earthier, heavier character is down at the bottom rim.
Yeah.
And as you go up, it gets lighter and sweeter, floral.
Yeah.
Those notes are all up there. Now, another thing to keep in mind, all of you, is that your nose is kind of lazy. you have only one nostril working at a time. You ever
Really?
notice you have one nostril seems like it's plugged while you're
Okay.
breathing out of the other? Um, your nostrils actually alternate every 3 to 4 hours. So one of the things you want to do is check to see which one's on the job. All right. But at the same
Yeah.
time, you want to, once you find that nostril, you put it at each side of the glass because you'll find different aromas at different points of the compass on the opening
Interesting.
of that glass.
Interesting.
Now, they all agreed that they liked the little stub.
Yeah,
I
it's
mean,
nice for holding.
what
It's good for holding.
you can hold it like this. Some guys like Richard Patterson prefers this, the stem copita,
Hmm.
which we also make, um, because he doesn't want to touch the bowl of the glass. So he
Ah,
uses the
okay.
stem. He there's some people who think that warming a whiskey is bad. I am not one of them. So I have no problem doing this,
Interesting.
holding it like that. But I typically don't. I usually hold it like that
Right. And
at the
your
base.
job at Glencairn is to spread the word and get bars and restaurants on board, correct?
Yeah. Um, to look for opportunities here in North America to represent it wherever it's at. Glencairn is not a big company. This glass is pretty famous. You see it all over the world. But
Hmm.
Glencairn has only about 50 people working at it. That's people who manufacture. That's people who design, who ship.
Hmm.
Uh, and actually, the marketing team is relatively small, maybe about 5 people, maybe not even that. Then you have accounting. Um, they had no one in North America. Andy
Right.
Davidson, the youngest son, used to travel the globe. That was his job,
Hmm.
and he was a young fella at the time, but it wore him out. And then eventually he got married and he had to settle down. So I've been a friend of the family since the early aughts, and I was kind of lumbering around, homeless, jobless. And they took pity upon me and they said, Marty, why don't you represent our brand in North America? And I go,
Beautiful.
okay, I happen to live there. So yeah, no
That's
problem.
perfect. So then, what's interesting with somebody like you who has had different roles in the industry, at this point in time, you're not married to any particular brand, okay, of whiskey.
Right.
Okay.
Mhm.
You can be very ecumenical in how you're talking about them and not favor one over the other.
I'm the
Um,
Switzerland of the whiskey world. That's what
that's
I am.
beautiful.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. A Swiss Irishman, that's just beautiful.
Yeah. Well, I
Yeah.
guess I could say I'm the Irish guy. Yeah, no, the Irish have Irish whiskey. Never mind. Yeah. Switzerland.
So let's talk about what you buy when you yourself are actually trying to add a whiskey for your shelf at home. Well, do you go looking for something in particular? Do you know what you're missing? Or are you just looking for something special when you're at the store?
You know, I don't buy a lot of whiskey, namely because, and I don't want this sounding too hoi polloi, but I'm given a lot of whiskey.
Of course. Of
Since
course.
I travel around the country, I get um, a lot of folks, uh, will give me a bottle just as a thank you for stopping in and visiting the distillery. Also, for 8 years, I was co-producing the Chicago Independent Spirit Expo, and I was helping a lot of brands get distributors, get into the show, introduce them to the marketplace. And again, as a thank you, he gave me
Okay.
bottles.
All right. Well, then I'm going to ask you a different question now.
All right.
I consider you to be very much of a whiskey educator. I've seen a lot of what you do online. I've seen some of the classes that you're teaching. And many of the people on this call, I know them, and I know that many of them are familiar with Scotch very well. Okay, they know the different regions of Scotland. Many of them also know about different types of bourbons and ryes. Uh, One area, though, where I think that we could use a little bit of a primer is on Irish whiskey. Okay,
The Irish.
the Irish, because I'm fairly certain, and just again from having been at many tastings with many of these people, I know that they lean towards Scotch, and I know that they go to the tables of Scotch at the whiskey tastings. So as I mentioned, I'm drinking, my Redbreast 12. I particularly love their cask strength port cask, which is amazing when I can find it. Can you tell us a little bit about the differences in the different kinds of Irish whiskeys?
Yeah, and there's actually quite a number of subcategories within Irish. Obviously, you have the red brass, which is a single pot still, which is malted and unmalted barley. You have single malt. So the Bushmills distillery, all it makes is single malt whiskey. You'll
Hmm.
see it's two blends, but they get the grain whiskey, which they blend with their single malt. They get that from Middleton. And Middleton is where they make Redbreast, they make Green Spot, they make Jameson, Powers. I
Hmm.
think they're still making patties for Sazerac.
Hmm.
Sazerac bought the brand patties. Um, and so they make primarily single pot still whiskey and single grain whiskey. Back in
Okay.
the day, before William Grant bought Tullamore Dew, they were making Tullamore Dew. They owned the
Mm.
brand. And they were actually importing single malt from Bushmills down to Middleton and thatting it with single pot still and single grain to make Tullamore Dew. Then, of course, Jameson is a blend. You have a number of blended whiskeys, Irish whiskeys, and that's a blend of single grain whiskey. And in Ireland, single grain whiskey is primarily corn, about 90% corn, 10% malted barley, as opposed to Scottish single grain, which is primarily wheat with barley.
Got it.
Um, both made in column stills, typically,
Hmm.
to get it up to the right strength. Let's see, that got single malt, single pot still,
I've had
blend,
Whistler.
single
Whistler's
grain.
delicious.
Uh, and the other thing too to keep in mind with Irish whiskey right now, though there are a lot of uh, Irish distilleries currently in production or starting
Hmm.
production, just like a Scotch, Irish whiskey has to be aged a minimum of 3 years
Okay.
in an oak cask. Um, so therefore, some of the whiskey, like the whiskey you're drinking from Teeling prior to, say, a year ago, and actually a lot of the stuff that's probably still on the shelves, um, that's most likely Bushmills.
Ah, interesting.
Yeah, if it's a blend, it's put. In fact, Teeling won a lot of awards for some of their older whiskeys, and that
Hmm.
was almost exclusively Bushmills. I was even blown away. I was in. I went to go visit Dublin. I was out drinking with a buddy of mine I knew from my Dublin days, and he took me to the Palace Bar. If you're ever in Dublin and you want to go to a great Irish whiskey bar, upstairs of the Palace in the Temple Bar area. Great little place to go into, a little bar, but beautiful selection of Irish whiskey. He pours me a 21-year-old double distilled peated single malt. And I go,
Wow.
oh, and it said Teelings. I go, oh, okay. So their dad used to own Cooley, which is now owned by Beam. So I thought, okay, they were making Connemara,
Hmm.
peated single malt. That this is just old Connemara. And he goes, no, that's Bushmills. It was an
Really?
experimental batch. Bushmills triple distills their whiskey, and they don't use peat. So that was an experimental batch they're making back in the 90s.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's incredible. That's awesome. So for somebody like you who's always out and about and you're always at the bars, you're teaching, you're at the restaurants, um, and of course you're incredibly active on Facebook. You run several different groups on Facebook. How are you holding up with our current state of isolation?
Actually, this is not much different uh, from my usual life.
How so?
Other than the fact, well, I work from home.
Hmm.
There is no Glencairn, USA office.
Mm.
I usually tease the guys back in Scotland that I'm like they're Kevin Costner in Dances with Wolves. This is their lone, small, dingy Western outpost of Glencairn, and I very rarely get supplies or communiques.
Hmm.
Um, the The big thing, the big change with all this for me is I do travel a lot for the job.
Mm,
Um, I attend all the whiskey events. One,
right.
to support the whiskey event itself, because they're usually using our glass. And the other is because my job is to go out there and shake hands and meet the brands and see who the decision makers are, and also discover new brands. And even though I'm no longer co-producing the Chicago Independent Spirit Expo, I
Hmm.
still like bringing brands, helping bring brands into Chicago.
Right.
I get nothing out of it other than a little satisfaction, but
Hmm.
it's kind of fun, especially
Right.
since marketing is not usually the strong point of a lot of newer distilleries.
Hmm.
Um, all their thought went into production,
Right.
and then once it came to dealing with distributors and how to open a market, they really are kind of lost.
Got it.
So
So
that's
when
what I did.
so when we reopen, what's the first bar in Chicago that you're going to?
Oh, that's a tough one.
That's a tough one, isn't it?
Yeah, because obviously it's like, you're
I
holding
mean,
back.
I've been thinking about it myself, and obviously for the selection and the people, for me, Delilah's is obviously right up there at the top. In terms of, but Delilah's is going to be a zoo that, when this opens, Delilah's is going to be like a mosh pit.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking maybe Duke of Perth might be a little bit less crazy, but
Well, the nice thing, well, that's a good point. I mean, it depends. Um, Now, Delilah's will have definitely a much younger group
mhm,
who might not care as much about social distancing or
good
even
point.
wearing face masks. They might be socially conscious that way, but it's going to be tough. And I was actually talking to Mike Miller, who owns Delilah's, the other day,
Great guy.
and he was saying if you have to social distance, if you had to do that, keep everyone 6 feet apart from each other, in Delilah's, he wouldn't be able to do the volume to keep the place open.
Right, because it's so small.
Yeah,
I mean, yeah, the place is tiny, so
yeah.
yeah, I don't know how he would do it.
I don't know. I really don't know how any of these bars are going to do it. It's going to be very, very tough for bars and restaurants once, even once the whole thing, once we have full, open city,
Hmm.
it's going to be very, very difficult for a lot of these folks.
No, definitely.
I'm hoping Mike is talking about, and this could be something that some of you guys might be interested in. He's talking about doing
Oh,
some online raffles of some of his whiskeys. For those of you who haven't gone to Delilah's has about 27 years worth of special bottlings
hmm,
that they've done over the years that
they're
are
amazing.
fascinating. Yeah,
They're amazing.
he's worked with some of the best from all over the world. Bourbon, scotches. I don't know if he's ever had an Irish, actually. Now
Oh,
that
you
I
have to
think of
talk
it.
to him about that.
But yeah, that would have been very hard to get anyways,
Yeah,
especially in the last,
right.
maybe now, but
Got it.
uh,
All right. So, for the benefit of all the other people here, and also in respect of your time, since we go to about 7:45, I'm going to stop right now, and we're going to turn it over to people to ask questions themselves.
okay.
And I'm actually going to say, last time we were on, I believe that Mike Nolan was having some trouble with his audio. And so I'm going to ask Mike Nolan if he has any questions so he can start us off. And then after that, I'm going to turn it over to Eric Leader to moderate the questions, and then I'll come back on later.
Okie
Okay?
doke.
Great. Thank you, Marty. Nolan?
Yeah, I don't have
Eric,
the problem
there we
this
go.
time because I'm not using headphones. So last time I didn't have the jack plugged in all the way, so that's what caused my technical difficulties. Um, Martin, I just want to say I really enjoy and appreciate your Capita glass. It's probably my favorite drinking glass right now.
It's great. I really like it. I think it's very elegant too, and there's certain whiskeys that I'll drink in the various glasses, and there is something really nice about the Copita Plus. Well, of course, the Glencairn comes with one too, but I like the little tasting cap.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're going to sit down and do some tastings in front of you and you don't want the aroma to escape, these are great. I love them. Is that it, Mike? Oh, God bless you.
All right, Eric, why don't you open it up for questions?
Sure. If anybody wants, they should be able to unmute themselves or raise your hand and I can unmute you.
So the top three whiskeys every, amateur whiskey drinker like us should have on our shelves, what would you recommend?
Well, first off, I think if you drink whiskey, you're no amateur. You are a pro, because whiskey, whiskey as far as I'm concerned, of all spirits, and I love tequila and I love rum, I love gin, I love cognac and armagnacs, but whiskey, but I would say nice, well-rounded, and very affordable. And this, to some of you, might sound very mundane, because I'm sure a lot of folks are into single malts, but I do Johnny Walker Black, Black Bush, get your Irish in there, and then Henry McKenna, as far as a really good bourbon. I mean, and I don't know, I've heard Henry McKenna's gone up in price recently, because it got listed as somebody put it on their best of list. I don't know if it was that one knucklehead with the whiskey Bible, but Jim Murray. I think that's a beautiful, great whiskey, and for the price, fantastic.
Wonderful. Next question.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Can I ask a question?
Of course.
Hi.
Hey,
Hi, how are you?
has everyone
I don't
gone
know.
to Sedgwick? Sedgwick
No,
stop?
we're closed.
Oh,
closed.
well, I mean before, but you're not closed, not for good.
Who knows after this? I don't know.
No, Puddles.
I don't know. I'm in Florida right now too anyway, so there might be a, South situation.
Moment of silence.
Anyway, I have a
Yeah.
question for you that concerns Chicago. Is the Independent Spirits Expo going to be happening, or did you guys take that off the table yet?
Well, so I stepped back from the Chicago Indie Spirit Expo a little more than a year ago. My niece, Jamie, stepped in to my shoes.
Oh,
So
but
she
you probably
produced.
have the inside info.
I'm sorry, what?
You probably have the inside info, though.
Well, no, you'd be surprised. No, I don't. I had a bug. So the Independent Spirit Expo, for all of you, was the brainchild of a guy by the name of Dave Schmier. Dave, you might know of him from, he founded Redemption Rye.
Great stuff.
Yeah, so Redemption, it was his baby. He sold it off a couple of years ago to the Deutsch family in New York. So they own it, the new incarnation of it now. But now Dave owns Deadwood Bourbon, Tumbling Dice. Tumbling Dice 11-year-old is delicious. So fantastic whiskey. And then he has a couple of special releases he puts out called the Senator, the Ambassador, the Presidential. Anyways, I convinced Dave to bring it into the Indie Spirit Expo to Chicago in 2011. And so he and I produced it together in Chicago, and it grew to be almost like 2.5 times the size of his New York show.
Wow.
So we had almost, I think one year we had 150 exhibitors. But it's vodka, gin, rums, tequilas, liqueurs, brandies, spirits of every sort from all around the world. I stepped back about a year ago because I thought maybe it was interfering with my work for Glencairn. And plus, I just felt like, I get tired of doing the same thing over and over for years. It's one of the reasons why I left Diageo. I just felt I was doing just kind of in a rut. So my niece Jamie stepped in. They did have it planned for October 6th. However, I think they're waiting to see what the situation is. Plus, with Glencairn, I got tabs on what a lot of other whiskey shows are doing. And a lot of these shows that have been canceled, there was a slew of them in March,
Right.
throughout the country. Most of them are postponing them and cramming them into October, November, and December.
Wow.
And that's nuts because it'll kind of depend. Do all these whiskey brands, are they going to want to, bust out
Spread
and say,
themselves out there. Yeah.
let's do all these shows, or
Right.
are they going to say, damn it, we lost a lot of money?
Right.
Some of the big brands that put out 1.75s might be doing pretty well, and any of the brands that have really high end stuff that's doing well. High end single malts, high end bourbons, those are still selling, but we're talking 150
guy.
bucks plus. The little guys, especially the independents, they're hurting bad because they're always the impulse buy when you walk through a store and you go, oh my God, what's this? Mike, all the whiskeys you're mentioning from the 50 states, that's, a guy like you is not going to discover a new whiskey at this point because most of these stores won't even let you go in that far or let you be in the store that long.
Right. I can't even imagine, Marty, that if they try to cram that many shows into that short a time period, what that's going to do to the reps. I mean, can you imagine how exhausted they're going to be traveling all the time?
Yeah, well, and there's a good point too. There's only so many bodies. That's why in Kentucky, there was always kickback from a lot of the big bourbon brands if there are whiskey shows anywhere else in the country taking place in September. Because what's September? National Bourbon Month.
National Bourbon Month.
And they want, and that's really means, what they really, really mean is National Kentucky Bourbon Month. And so they want to do all the stuff that's happening in Kentucky. And right now you have the Bourbon Affair, Bourbon and Beyond, the Kentucky Bourbon Festival. That's all taking place in September.
Mm-hmm.
It's still tentatively planned. I think they're canceling Bourbon and Beyond.
Yeah.
Actually, I do have a question for you. I assume you've been to Galena Whiskey Weekend?
Yeah, I've been there last two.
So
They're great.
Can you tell me a little bit about that? Because a number of us on here are thinking of doing a road trip to Galena for Whiskey Weekend. Can you tell us about it?
You owe it to yourselves. It's great. I love it. Galena in winter is so pretty. It's really, for those of you who haven't been to Galena, it's really, I'm assuming the southern part of Illinois, the far southern part in the national forest down there is nice. I've never been. But Galena reminds you of Kentucky. There's rolling hills, steep inclines on these roads. It's fun. It's beautiful. And if there's a snow, it looks like a postcard.
Nice.
It's really nice.
But are there enough distilleries there to support a whole whiskey weekend? Obviously, Blom Brothers.
You're right. So to give you a little background, the Blum Brothers teamed up with a retailer and a bar in Galena to start the Galena Whiskey Weekend. And actually, I think it was supposed to be originally just the Galena Whiskey Festival. And it was going to be like 3 hours, 4 hours long. It got so big that now they have 2 sessions.
Wow.
So it starts, I think one is from 1 p.m. to 4 p.m. and then from 6 to 8 or 6 to 9, something like that. And yes, there were enough whiskeys to support it. A good thing to do is go the night before. Find yourself a nice, there's cabins you can rent, or there's some really cool old rustic hotels. Actually, you should go do a tour I was there once, and I thought I was going to go hang out with Matt and Mike, and they were both tuckered out from some event they did that day. And I said, oh man, what am I going to do in Galena in January by myself? So I went on the haunted house tour, and like any haunted house tours, no ghosts, nothing. But really cool background, and I did not know that not only did it have at one point 6 breweries in the town of Galena, and of course you should know it was for a while the home of Ulysses S. Grant, but also the beer Red Stripe, often thought of being a Jamaican beer, actually was created in Galena.
I just learned something new.
Boom, just
Mind blown.
mind blown.
Mind
But
blown.
lovely and a nice array, a nice, just like the Distill America. It has a nice combination of the big brands, small brands, and a lot of brands in between, and whiskeys from all over. So you might find some Paul John there. You know, some good Indian.
Really, Paul
single
John?
malt.
That's good stuff. I mean, from India. I mean,
I love it,
that's
love
really
it.
good stuff. No,
Yeah.
that's delicious. Let's take 2 more questions from the floor, and then I'll sum it up. 2 more questions.
So I got one. You mentioned the Henry McKenna, you know, kind of getting recognition and now getting more popular all of a sudden.
Yeah.
As somebody who's been getting more into whiskeys more over the past 2 years, I was, you know, my father always was in this. Johnny Walker Blue was his, kept on the shelf. He really loved it and all. But as somebody who's gotten more into whiskeys and all over the years, the past couple of years especially, I find that every time I find one of those diamonds, I'm 2 minutes before somebody else finds it, and then it goes through the roof. What is one that you think might be the next one to do that?
Oh, wow.
That's a tough question.
Hasn't quite gotten the fame yet.
Yeah, and you know that's funny. I mean, it's a tough one right now, because actually it's going to be interesting to see just what happens to the market after all of this. I mean, are there going to be enough people out there to still build those whiskey collections? If this was back in January, I might have some ideas, but now, I don't know. That's a good one, because the other thing too, you have anywhere between 1,700. I know you have more than 2,000 whiskey brands out on the market, American whiskey brands. Over 1,700 distilleries in the U.S. And each one could have been turning out some really wonderful stuff. It's a great whiskey, and if they had better marketing, I think it would be a whiskey that people would really, really gravitate to, because they're super transparent on their label. It's 11 Wells. You can find this at Binny's. I don't know how much it goes for, but I remember going up and visiting it there. I think their distillery is in part of an old Pabst Blue Ribbon. I think it's Pabst Blue Ribbon brewery.
Where are they?
Minneapolis, Minnesota.
11 Wells.
11 Wells. And I was telling them one problem with their marketing is that the label has all the information. If you were the biggest whiskey doink in the world, you'd be, pardon the expression, be having a little bit of a whiskey boner, because there's it's everything you want to know. When it was distilled, how much, to what level was it distilled at, and then what proof did it come out of the barrel, and then what proof did you bring it down to, and blah blah blah, and everything, to the point where their name is in a little red circle about that big, like a silver dollar on the label, and it says 11 Wells. Like, dude, it took me like 30 seconds to find the name of your whiskey. I mean, come on.
Yeah, they
And
need your
that's,
help. They need your
yeah,
help.
well, that's typically what why you their distributor. I don't know who their distributor was or is in Illinois, but they should have pointed that out to them, because usually distributors want to sell your stuff. They want your stuff to sell, so they usually point that stuff out before they even bring the brand in. But
Right.
I don't know. Somebody might have just said, "Oh yeah, it's good stuff. Yeah, we'll sell it."
Yeah.
But check it out. I think that's really good. And who knows if they get the right, you know, it's another one. And they seem to be having some marketing behind them. I do like some of the rye whiskey from Driftless Glen.
Mm.
They stumbled coming out of the gate as far as marketing for the first couple of years. But now I believe they have a brand ambassador here in Chicago, which is smart. They're up in Baraboo, Wisconsin. And they're putting a lot of money and a lot of, you know, Dave Pickerel is one of the late Dave Pickerel's little babies that he helped with. Doing great stuff. But I don't know. That's a hard.
That's a great
one.
question. It's a great question.
But it's like predicting the
Right.
Yeah.
Ask me to predict the future. Ask
Well,
me to
thank you
predict
for your input.
the future with this thing.
Yeah.
We'll
And
take
Paul-
one more question and then I'll sum it up. Any other questions out there?
Yeah, Paul had a question.
Paul?
All right, here's a fun one, maybe a walk down memory lane. What has been your favorite whiskey tasting dinner pairing that you've had?
That's a good one, because I used to do whiskey dinners all the time, especially with the classic malt selection. And there was always some really, you always kind of left it up to the chef. You kind of give the chef some tasting notes and let him run from there. Because I usually burn my chili mac, so I'm no cook. However, I did assist with a fellow master of whiskey. That was our title back in the Diageo days. We're masters of whiskey. I ended up leaving as a senior master of whiskey.
Good accent. Good accent.
Yes, thank you. I used the Scottish accent when I first started wearing that kilt because I didn't want to look too much like an ass. But we were down at the Ritz-Carlton in Key Biscayne, and bacon wrapped dates with Lagavulin is just phenomenal. Dalwhinnie poured over vanilla ice cream and honey is phenomenal.
Yeah, that's a diabetic dream.
It really is, yeah. What was it? Oh, Talisker and salmon. Grilled salmon and Talisker. Talisker 10. Phenomenal. Let me think of some other obvious. I've been to some bourbon. Oh my God. Yeah, since if any of you are bourbon lovers, you have to attend this class. It's at a couple of the different events down in Louisville. I was just there last month and I attended the class with Kelly Ramsey from Art Eatables. She has a great chocolate shop. Her bourbon, her chocolate bonbons are 5% alcohol, made with Elijah Craig. I mean, they're amazing bonbons. And she teams up with a fellow by the name of Steve Combs, who's written a couple of books about ham and cheese, not sandwiches, but Kentucky hams. They did a pairing down there that blew me away. I've gone to 3 other pairings, and it's always different hams and cheese and different pairings with different whiskeys. One time they did just the Heaven Hill collection. Amazing. Just phenomenal. I wanted to go out and buy all the Kentucky ham I could find. And I stopped and thought, what am I going to do with a bunch of Kentucky ham? I'd live alone. But amazing. If guys have a chance, if you ever see them doing anything, go on Art Eatables website and see if she might even list some of that stuff.
Art Eatables? Okay, yeah, those bourbons. So those bourbons with Elijah Craig, if you could maybe help me find like the link to that. We can post it on my website there, on the Facebook group.
We are
So that
eatables.
you could order them.
Oh, sure,
That sounds great.
Oh my
All
God.
right.
And, real quick, Gil, the little bonbons
Yeah.
have little gold Glencairn glasses on them,
Oh,
made of
nice.
chocolate.
Oh, beautiful. Beautiful. Nice job.
Yeah.
All right. Well, before we finish everything here, I just want to tell everybody that we have 2 others of these lined up so far. I believe on May 4th, we have Monique Houston. Monique Houston, who is a wonderfully generous, knowledgeable person who is going to talk with us on May 4th. And then Marty actually helped us set up the next one, which is Bill Welter, right? The owner and distiller at Journeyman Distillery.
Yeah.
Okay.
Bill's great.
So we got that. So that one's coming. I believe that one's May 18th, but I'll be posting it just to make sure. Okay.
Ask Monique about her days managing the Dundee Dell whiskey bar in Omaha, Nebraska. That's where I first met her.
Nice. Yeah. Very, very nice.
She was only 12.
Yeah. Well, but in Omaha, it's legal to drink there at that age.
It's very legal,
okay.
yeah.
So, Eric, if you could do me a favor and unmute everybody, just for a second, if you could possibly unmute everybody. All right, we're going through there. And I'd like everybody to raise a glass to both our guest, Marty Duffy, and to better times for all of us. So, cheers.
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 Gil. Nice job, guys.
Here's
Thank
to a
you,
long
Marty.
life.
Thank you so much.
Here's to a long life and a merry one, a quick death and an easy one, a pretty girl and an honest one, and a good whiskey and another one.
Oh yeah.
Thanks.
Awesome. That was just awesome.
Very good. Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful evening, everybody, and we'll see you again soon. Take care.
Everyone be
Good
safe
night.
out there.
Thank you.
Be careful on your drive home.